Can you believe that I had never read a murder mystery before? At least that was until a few months ago when I read The Thursday Murder Club over Christmas. I liked a lot about this book. I did not love it, but it left me with an itch that only more murder mystery could scratch. And so in this video, we're going to be reading 5 very different murder mysteries to try and get a sense of the murder mystery genre and what kind of murder mystery reader I am. We're going to start with the Agathas, which is a pretty new YA murder mystery kind of based on Agatha Christie. Then we're going to try out a cozy mystery with the Frangipani Tree mystery by Ovidia. This is set in 1936 in Singapore and it features a disabled main character. Next is something quite different, but I really wanted to include it in this video. It's called Montgomery Bonbon Murder at the Museum. It's a middle grade book that's coming out next month, I think, and the cover is going to look like this. And it's about a 10-year-old girl named Bonnie who's actually like secretly the world's greatest detective. This next one also is a little bit out there as far as like the murder mystery genre. I'm not sure it quite fits into that, but I wanted to give it a go. It's My Sister the Serial Killer. And even on the blurb, it's pretty clear who the killer is. So I don't think it's going to be a murder mystery in that sense. But I mean, it's listed as crime, thriller, mystery on GoodReads. And after all, we are trying to get a pretty broad sense of the lay of the land of the mystery genre. And then finally, a book that I'm very excited for, it's The Twyford Code by Janice Hallett. I've heard a lot of great things about this one. It says on the back, Enid Blyton meets Agatha Christie with a cracking twist. Obviously, having only read one murder mystery before, I'm a complete beginner to all of this, but I am really excited to dive right in and find out what all the fuss is about. So these are the 5 books we're going to be reading together in this video. There's a lot of reading, so let's get started. Okay, so I have finished the Agathas. Now, I don't know if this would technically be classed as a cozy mystery by everybody, but I mean, it's set in a place called Castle Cove and it definitely has fun vibes. In this, we're following a bunch of high school kids and our main character is a girl named Alice, who's kind of had a recent falling out with most of her friends, including her boyfriend. Basically, last summer, Alice disappeared without warning and without explanation. People were obviously happy she wasn't dead, but they were pretty pissed. So since then, she's had a massive falling out with her friends and with her friend circle, with her boyfriend, and she's also just like been struggling at school a little bit. So she is assigned a tutor, like a fellow student, but a high-performing one, to help her out a little bit, and her name is Iris. But then after a pretty messy party, Alice's ex-best friend, Brooke, goes missing. At first, the police don't take this very seriously. They assume that she's basically pulling an Alice and just like gonna show up again in 5 days or so. And so they don't investigate. But Alice and Iris both suspect that something is awry. And so they start their own investigation. Alice is a big fan of Christie. She loves Christie novels. She's read pretty much all of them. And every single chapter does begin with a quote from a Christie book. And she pretty much figures that she's up to the task of finding Brooke because she's learnt from the best. Poirot. This is YA, so it was a very quick read, but I don't often really enjoy YA. I had a lot of fun with this. I was really engaged in the mystery. I was really engaged in the different characters and their dynamics and all of the secrets and the messiness between all of these people. I felt like class played a really interesting role in how all of these kids interacted and their experiences of each other. I thought there was some pretty powerful commentary on policing and how women and girls are often just like not valued or taken seriously by police. I did pick who had done it, like honestly, like by a third of the way through, maybe not even that. I thought that was pretty obvious, but I still had so much fun like getting there. However, the ending was just a little bit ridiculous. So I didn't really like how everything wrapped up. I didn't really love the destination. I had an awful lot of fun on the journey. Now I'm going to compare this briefly to my only other experience with mystery, just so we can learn a little bit about my tastes. And that is, of course, The Thursday Murder Club. While I did prefer the writing and the narration and the setting and like the characters more in The Thursday Murder Club, I much prefer the story and the mystery in this one. I've spoken about why I didn't really like The Thursday Murder Club mystery, and that had a lot to do with the fact that like you didn't learn any clues on page. You were just told after the fact that somebody had solved things with evidence and information that you had never even been given as a reader. That is not the case with this one. I mean, evidenced by the fact that I figured it out. But I don't know, I still preferred that experience and found it more satisfying, even if I figured it out very early on. I found it satisfying following along with the investigation and watching our characters put the clues together and sort of being confused by seemingly conflicting clues and trying to make my own assessments along the way with them, which is what I suspected after having read The Thursday Murder Club, that I would prefer something like this, and now we have it confirmed. So I don't know, mystery readers, is there a word for that? Is there a word for the kind of mystery that gives you the clues along the way? I mean, maybe not all of them, and maybe not all very obviously, but like enough to feel like you might be kind of sleuthing along with the characters, as opposed to the ones where the sleuthing is done off page. Are there words for that? I don't know. Help me with my language here, because I don't really know how to make sure that I'm picking up books that are more like this and less like The Thursday Murder Club. I would love your advice on that, but for now, I'm gonna get stuck into my next read. So I have just finished the Frangipani Tree Mystery by Ovidia U, and I have to say I have some very complicated and conflicting feelings and thoughts about this one. Basically, this is the first in a series by Ovidia U. I think she has a couple of series, and it's set in 1936 in Singapore. I think this is called the Crown Colony series. Our main character's name is Sue Lin. She's a local girl whose parents has passed away, so she's been raised mostly by her uncle and her grandmother. And she did get an education at like a mission. And because she's getting to that age, her family has plans to marry her off. But Sue Lin has some really grand career aspirations of becoming a journalist. She wants to be independent, she wants to make her own money, and she just wants to make her own way in the world. And of course, she wants to have a little bit of an adventure along the way. Sue Lin is also disabled. We find out quite early on that as a child, she had polio, and it has left her with a limp. Then up on Frangipani Hill at the government house, the nanny dies. It looks like it might be an accident, but there's a few things that make the inspector, who is an Irish man, and Sue Lin suspect that maybe foul play is afoot. But now that the nanny's dead, the disabled daughter of the governor needs a new nanny, and so Sue Lin steps in. I think the daughter is actually like late teens, but she had some kind of illness when she was young that has meant that she hasn't cognitively developed past the age of 7. And her stepmother in particular is pretty nasty to her, and you know, there's some slurs used, like the R word is used in this book more than once. But Sue Lin really takes to her, so she figures she can nanny, get some experience, and also kind of keep a lookout for some clues about what really happened to the previous nanny. So that's the setup. Kind of fun, right? And I suppose I just wasn't always sure where to situate this book with its commentary. There definitely is commentary on race and class and even disability and just on the colonization of Singapore and like the relationship between the colonizers and the colonized. That's all stuff I liked, and I liked seeing it in a mystery. Obviously, this is only the third mystery I've read, and it's the first time that I've sort of got some more explicit conversations around that stuff. But I suppose there were some elements of those conversations that I just wasn't always sure if it was just the author trying to be authentic to the time period or if it just felt a little bit problematic. One of those examples was, of course, the use of the R slur, like I've already mentioned. There was also some like the way that race was spoken about in terms of like Indians and stuff, like that felt a little bit icky. And every now and then like a fatphobic comment was dropped. I don't know, like some of it just, I didn't enjoy reading that stuff, especially when it felt less like we were commenting on issues and more just like reinforcing oppression. I think especially the way Dee Dee, the governor's daughter, was spoken about and her disability. That didn't always feel very intentional and self-aware. Like there was at least 3 times, I think from memory, that she was compared in the writing to an animal. Sometimes it was like supposed to be a nice thing, like she was compared to a dog, but to me that's still ultimately dehumanizing. Like I said, I wasn't always sure of the intention or how self-aware the author was when she was using these kinds of words, but ultimately it did take me out of the story a little bit. Having said that, I liked a lot of what this book was doing, and I think I could have enjoyed it except for 2 main issues that I had with the narrative. The first was that for a lot of this, it felt like the mystery element took a massive backseat. An awful lot of like the first 2/3 of this book were taken up with Sue Lin just sort of like settling into her new role as the nanny. And I suppose I was only interested in that stuff to a point. The other thing that really bothered me and that made the reading experience just a lot less pleasant and honestly felt kind of like unedited and a bit jumpy was the fact that most of this is told in first-person perspective from Sue Lin, but every now and then it would slip into third-person narration, and there was nothing to like delineate, like there was no page break or it wasn't a new chapter. It was just literally one paragraph we were first-person narration from Sue Lin's perspective, the next paragraph it was third-person. And I did have to kind of like go back and check a few times. It was just a bit disorienting. And at the end of the day, besides Sue Lin, very few of the characters were at all likable. And it's not like it was played off in like a funny way. They were just kind of awful people. So for all of those reasons, this ended up being quite a disappointing read for me. And I'm honestly kind of sad about it. I do like Sue Lin. I really like the setting. And I like that we had a mystery that was willing to raise topics about race and disability and sexism and colonialism. I suppose at the end of the day, I just didn't always love the execution, and that meant that I didn't really have a good time reading this. And I suppose one of the things that I'm coming to a cozy mystery for is to just have a good time. And I didn't. I did not have a good time with this book. Okay, so I finished what we might call the 2 wild cards of this video. Firstly, I finished My Sister the Serial Killer This was wild. This is listed under the thriller and mystery categories on GoodReads, and I did find it in the crime section of my local bookshop. But to me, this almost read a little bit more literary than a lot of the other things that I've been reading in the mystery genre. I suppose it was very character-centered. It almost felt like a character study of someone forced into a very strange situation. Actually, it kind of reminded me a little bit, at least in tone, of Temporary by Hilary Lecter. I'm not at all saying that these two books read the same or even that they explore the same themes. I think it's more that they have a similar approach to the themes that they are exploring. And that is that both of these books are looking at something that's kind of horrific and messed up, but through a very literary, humorous, absurd kind of lens. My Sister the Serial Killer in particular is about two sisters, the oldest of which is our main protagonist. Her name is Korede and her younger sister's name is Ayula. Her younger sister is just gorgeous and beautiful and everybody loves her. Korede is a nurse and is just much less traditionally attractive. And she has also fallen into a role of feeling very protective of her younger sister. Unfortunately, her younger sister is an absolute menace. The story opens with Korede, the older sister, getting a phone call from Ayula, the younger sister, basically begging her to come over because she's accidentally killed her boyfriend and she needs Korede to help her dispose of the body. What makes this a whole lot more interesting though is that we very quickly discover that this is the third time that this has happened. And so at this point, Korede is starting to wonder how much of an accident these killings really are. And so while this is a story about murder, about the murders that have already happened, the murders that do happen in this book, and the potential murders that might happen, the story itself is much more about these two sisters and their very strained but committed relationship to each other, the loyalty that they have to each other. And it is also just a story about violence and trauma and how those things can often be a vicious cycle, and those two things inform each other. So I do feel like this book, out of all of the ones we've read so far, is the most different. Like, it almost doesn't really feel like a mystery story, so I'm wondering if it really even belongs in this video. But the whole point was to explore mystery quite broadly and to try and figure out what it is I do and don't like about the genre. So at the end of the day, I am really glad that we read this because I really enjoyed this. Like I said, there's a lot of things about the way that this is done that reminded me of Temporary, and that was one of my favorite books of 2022. I don't know that this is going to be one of my favorite books of 2023, but I just really enjoy the tone. Basically taking something kind of dark to a really like nth degree kind of conclusion that, yes, does comment on some of the more horrific elements of those things, but has a lot of fun doing it. I think another thing that I did really like about this was that although it did feel quite tense and high stakes at times, it never felt like overly scary. It wasn't terrifying to read. It wasn't overly graphic, overly gory, and I wasn't overly worried about the sisters. I mean, I was a little bit, but do you know what I mean? Like, everything was reasonably balanced, I think, by that quite comedic tone. Now let's talk about something entirely different, and that is Murder at the Museum. Now, as I mentioned, this is a proof copy. The actual cover of the book is going to look a little bit different. I quite like the cover, actually. And this was another resounding success. I had an awful lot of fun with this. I read it in one afternoon and I loved it. In this story, we meet 10-year-old Bonnie Montgomery, and she is really good friends with her grandpa, and they like to just like hang out together. But it turns out Bonnie has like a secret identity as the world's greatest detective. His name is Montgomery Bonbon. And one day, Bonnie and her grandfather go on like a little day trip to a museum. When the lights turn out, they hear a scream. So while the lights are out, she quickly grabs her big coat that's in her backpack at all times, slaps on a fake moustache, dips her little beret that she's wearing, and gets ready to start investigating. We soon find out that there has indeed been a murder at this museum and a priceless artifact has been stolen. This feels very sleuthy. We're dropped lots of clues that like I, as a 32-year-old reading a book for 10-year-olds, definitely did pick up on, but I still just enjoyed it. I enjoyed following along with those clues. I loved the dynamic between Bonnie and her grandpa, who, when they're investigating, goes by the name Banks. He's basically her sidekick, and it's adorable. We follow along as Bonnie, or Montgomery Bonbon, like interviews different people, or like does a little bit of spying, a little bit of sleuthing, a little bit of breaking and entering every now and then too. And overall, the tone of this is very lighthearted and fun. Obviously, being for like 8 to 12-year-olds, there is not a heavy focus on the actual murder itself or any gory details. It doesn't linger on the messiness or the sadness of the actual death too much, basically, is what I'm saying. But equally, it doesn't feel disrespectful, which is something I did appreciate. I really liked that we do see Bonnie make a few mistakes, and her grandfather actually talks about how, you know, he was about her age too when he made the first mistake that really impacted or hurt somebody else. And she learns that it is important that when she makes a mistake, even if it wasn't intentional, she needs to do her best to make things right. But what has this taught me about my personal taste, not just the sort of books that I would like to recommend? It's taught me that I really appreciate quite a light tone when it comes to crime and mystery. And I think at the beginning I sort of thought that that meant that I was into cozy mystery. And I think I might be, but I don't know, is there like another sort of subset that's slightly adjacent, but not quite cozy mystery, which is just fun mystery? I'm sure there's a bit of like a Venn diagram crossover between the two, but I think I'm learning quite quickly that I very much appreciate something that just feels a little bit playful and a little bit bouncy. I don't know if that makes sense. Basically, the bones of this feels in a lot of ways like what it is that I'm looking for from mystery. Like, I like that we have a really fun, likable main character. I love the dynamic between her and her sidekick. I also really liked that the way that the mystery was sort of constructed and revealed. I liked that we got to follow along with her finding out about the clues. I liked that the cast of characters, and in particular like the set of suspects we had, was like pretty specific, you know? Like there wasn't like a wide range of people and it could just be like anyone come in at the last minute who actually did it. I also really liked that we got to know all of these people quite well and they all had strong personalities and strong characterizations. I feel like we're covering some good ground in this video. I feel like I'm learning quite a bit about my personal mystery tastes. I did start the Twyford Code late last night. I'm like barely into it at all. I'm already really enjoying it though. So once I finish that, I will come back to you with my thoughts, my feelings, and my findings, and then we can rank all of these books and talk about where I want to go next with mystery. I finished the Twyford Code last night and this was not everything I hoped it was going to be. Although I did not like this book, I am glad that I read it because there is something that I really appreciate about this, like the perspective and the uniqueness and just like the framing of everything. It's just unlike anything I've really read before. It's quite an involved book, so I don't know that I'll be able to really explain it all that well, but at least how it sets out at the beginning is that we're introduced to a man named Steve. We find out that Steve has had quite a troubled life and he did fall into some quite serious crime, gang sort of situations, and he spent the last like decade in jail. And he has been reflecting on his past and sort of like trying to figure out where everything went wrong. And although we do learn quite a bit about his upbringing and everything, the moment that he sort of keeps coming back to as being like the moment that changed everything for him was the day that his teacher, Miss Isles, went missing. Basically, a few weeks before this happened, back when Steve was like 12 or 13, he found a book on the bus. This book was by children's author Edith Twyford, who is basically like this world's stand-in for Enid Blyton. There's also some handwritten notes in this book that Steve has found on the bus, and Miss Isles becomes very interested in this book. So interested, in fact, that she decides to take these kids on a little day trip out to the cottage where Edith Twyford wrote these books. But it's a day that Steve doesn't really remember in its entirety. He just knows that after that day, Miss Isles went missing and nobody ever heard from her again. And so he's starting to wonder if there was something more to the book and to the reason that they went to this cottage that might have to do with Miss Isles' disappearance. And the way that this book is delivered is in transcribed voice notes that Steve has taken for himself. Basically, at the beginning of the book, we're told by an inspector that his phone has been found and these voice notes has been recovered. There's 200 of them and they've been run through like just a computer program to transcribe them. And that is how this book is told, through the transcribed voice notes that Steve has been like telling himself to keep track of this sort of investigation that he's going on to find out about what happened to Miss Isles. And because it is transcribed from voice notes, there are mistakes in the text. For example, Miss Isles, the teacher, is spelt out Miss Isles every time that we read it. Words like must have are transcribed to mustard a lot of the time. I thought it was really effective and it just felt very like thematically consistent and immersive. At the beginning, I also quite liked Steve and I liked getting to know him and like learning more about his past and watching him sort of like try to go straight even though he was becoming more and more obsessed with this code. However, at some point, I don't know what point exactly that was, maybe around halfway, it just all started to unravel a bit for me. There were things that started happening that just felt a little bit too tense for me. Like it started feeling more like a thriller. I'm sure most people who actually read thrillers would not describe this as a thriller, but like that was my experience. I just started getting stressed out. And we've already established that I'm coming to the mystery genre for some fun. And like a lot of this was just more stressful than fun for me. And then the closer we got to the ending, the more convoluted it became. I've heard some people describe this book as clever, as genius, and to me, that is not how it read. Instead, it just read overdone, convoluted. It all just felt like it was trying a little bit too hard to be clever. And something I have discovered about myself pretty firmly across most genres, I think, is that once like a twist or a reveal has happened, I don't really like having it like thoroughly explained to me. Like I don't like being treated as if I haven't already understood what the implications were. And basically we find out sort of like the twist of this book, and then we still have another 30 pages of like explaining it to us. And like, I just didn't like that. For me and the reader that I am, those last 30 or so pages more felt like a victory lap for the author than they did like necessary interesting information for me. But like I said, there is something quite unique about this that I do appreciate. And although I didn't like this experience, I have not finished this book thinking that I will never want to read from this author again. But those are my takeaways from this book in particular. Now let's talk about this challenge and this experience overall. Unfortunately, this is definitely my least favorite of the video, but I still feel like I learned quite a bit about myself and my tastes when it comes to the mystery genre through reading this. So I'm not mad that I did read it. Then I think coming in at number 4 for me would be The Frangipani Tree Mystery by Ovidia. Like I mentioned, I just had very conflicting feelings about this overall, and it just didn't really give me quite what I wanted, although there were definitely elements about this that I really appreciated. These next 3, I enjoyed all of them, so they're kind of hard to rank, and they're all very different. I think if pushed, I would say that the Agathas would come in at number 3. Like I said, I really liked the journey of this one. It was a very quick, fun, pacey read, and it had the right kind of stakes for me. There's also something about a bunch of rich people and all their secrets that really worked for me too. It was just the ending that got a little bit much for me. I think number 2 would have to be Murder at the Museum. I think this is definitely my favorite of the murder mysteries that we've read, which seems ridiculous. It is a middle grade, but I just had so much fun with this. I think my favorite of the video has to be My Sister, the Serial Killer. And as I mentioned when we were talking about this, I do feel like this feels quite different from the other books. This doesn't feel like murder mystery. Like, it is a little bit mysterious, and there definitely are murders, but it's not like trying to figure out who did the murdering and why. It's more about figuring out how to cover up those murders and how far someone is willing to go for their beloved sister. I think the fact that this is short and punchy really worked for me, and overall the tone really worked for me too. So I think this would be my ranking overall, and I think ultimately my main takeaways are that I didn't really read any like true cozy mysteries in this, although I kind of set out to do that. So maybe we'll have to do another video where I very specifically read cozy mysteries. I saw a lot of people on GoodReads comparing this to A Good Girl's Guide for Murder, something that I have never read, never even contemplating reading before, but now I think I want to. And then because I also keep saying that I want something fun and a little bit absurd, I keep hearing people talk about Finlay Donovan. Now, I don't know that the tone of Finlay Donovan is really going to match this, but I mean, if there was a booktube mystery darling of 2022, it was definitely Finlay Donovan. And ridiculous and fun are words that I keep hearing people use to describe that series. So I'm also starting to wonder if I should give that one a try. So those are the 3 directions that I'm kind of thinking of heading in now that I've finished this little challenge. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about where you think I should head next. Whichever path I do choose, I'm sure I'll take you along the journey, so be on the lookout for another mystery reading vlog. For now though, I'd like to say a big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon, and especially big thank you goes to Livia, Lynette Brown, and Marie. And thank you for watching all the way to the end. I'll talk to you in the comments and in the next video. Until then, happy reading. Bye!